Hello and welcome to the Life and Leadership Podcast, where we're developing military leaders one question at a time. I'm your host, Chris Fortier, and today we are joined by Command Sergeant Major Cesaitis. He's a 31-year Army veteran with time split between active duty and the Massachusetts National Guard, where he deployed 5 times and earned 2 Bronze Stars and a Presidential Unit Citation. He retired as the Command Sergeant Major for the 1st of the 101st Field Artillery Regiment, managing operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Qatar. He's a hero, he's a leader, and he's making time to be here with us today. Sergeant Major, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
So, you've gone a lot of places, you've done a lot of incredible things. Just out of everything you've done in your career, what assignment would you say was most influential in shaping your leadership style?
So for me, the most substantial position I had was when I was a platoon sergeant in Afghanistan. So in October of 2014, I was assigned to an infantry company. We were deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom to build security for a provincial reconstruction team that was in the province of Zabul. I led 42 men. We conducted over 1,000 joint missions throughout the time, both mounted and dismounted patrolling. And it really got me a chance to really work on my leadership, work with different agencies as well as different branches in the military. We worked with Air Force and Navy, and it was really eye-opening to the different styles out there that people had in leadership. And I took a lot from the Command Sergeant Major that was assigned to us, who helped mentor me a little bit during that time. And I really thought that deployment helped me grow the most as a leader.
Oh, thank you. And all of those different leadership styles is what we're here to discuss today. But just before we get too deep into the details, are the opinions you express today your personal thoughts or the official position of the U.S. Army?
This is all me. This is my opinions. This is how I feel about the things that young leaders need to understand when they first join the military, as well as, just stuff I've learned through my experiences as an individual. These are not reflective of the military's opinion or doctrine or anything like that.
Perfect. Right, thinking about that young leader showing up to the first duty station, meeting his or her senior NCO who's been assigned to work with, right? What advice do you have for that young officer trying to build relationships with the senior NCOs around them?
All right, so this is really good. So once I retired from the military, I became a junior ROTC instructor. So I get to talk about these things a lot, and I try to instill some of this into my cadets, like the things they need to realize when they first take command or first come into that leadership role. And it really boils down to 5 basic principles that I think everybody understands. These things, we talk about them for our entire lives. So the first thing that I think is one of the most important is for that young platoon leader that's coming into a platoon is just to have respect for the experience of that platoon sergeant. That platoon sergeant has probably been in that job for a number of years. They've worked in that job field from anywhere from 8 to 15 years, right? So there's going to be a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise that you can use, right? So don't go in there thinking you're better than that platoon sergeant, right? In the Army today, it's no longer, the lieutenant, the officer has the college degree, and the enlisted soldier is just there to do the work. More and more times you'll find that platoon sergeant, that E7, has a college degree. They've been doing this job. They're educated, and they have a lot of experience and a lot of advice that they can give you. The second one is communication. Now, I thought about communication as being the first thing because without open communication, it's hard to build relationships. Communicating, when it comes to communicating, as the platoon leader, you have to be the first start. You have to start this. You have to have a plan in place that you want your platoon, your organization. If you're not a platoon sergeant, if you're not a platoon leader, maybe you're an operations section. But you have to have a plan. You have to have some sort of end state that you want that small platoon to get to, right? So you need to be able to communicate that. And you got to communicate a lot. It takes a lot of talking, a lot of back and forth between sergeant to get things down. And you're not going to agree on everything. It's not going to happen. You're going to have things different, but when the bottom line, it's your platoon, you're the commander, you're in charge. You need to take responsibility for that. The third thing I like to talk about is to empower your NCOs, right? Give them the power to make decisions. If you take that away and you start trying to be the sole person in charge, and you're strict, stern, you're going to run into a lot of headaches. You're going to into a lot of problems. So empowering your support staff, empowering your NCOs to make decisions, that's going to go a long way. The second two things is you and that platoon sergeant, that E7 that you come in, that you work that relationship with, you two need to be on the same page on everything. In front of your soldiers, you have to have a unified front. If one person is saying one thing and the other person saying the other, it's going to really mess up that continuity of your team. So having that unified front, you have to work together. That's the only way to build a team. The platoon leader and platoon sergeant relationship is one of the most important relationships, in my opinion, in the military today, because that is where the rubber meets the road, and that's where all the really hard decisions, when you're facing that forward environment, that's where the hard decisions are being made. And the last thing, as the platoon leader, I had a battalion commander once tell me this, and I really took it to heart, is that as a young officer, you're the moral compass of that platoon, right? You have to be the one that's always doing the right thing, right? Always, always, always. If you start to stray off course, your young soldiers, they're going to stray even further. They're going to use your example. If he can put his hands in his pockets, then I don't have to louse my shoes, and I don't have to worry about any of the other regulations. So you have to lead by example and be that moral compass for your unit. That is my 5 quick steps to how to start that relationship with your platoon sergeant.
So of those 5 things, a lot of the relationship piece is tough to build before you're actually in the platoon and meeting the people you're going to be working with. But of those 5, what can you start doing ahead of your first assignment? So our first question from the field comes from Ryan out of Fort Knox. I just got to my first active duty base and was assigned to the battalion staff. What should I focus on learning today so I'll be ready to be a platoon leader tomorrow?
All right, so moving from the shop to a platoon, you got to know your craft, really study your craft, study your MOS right down to the basic user level. If you're going into an infantry platoon, know everything about those machine guns, know everything about those rifle systems, really understand your tactical aspects of command, right? Because at the platoon level, it's all about tactics. It's all about being a tactical commander, right? Be tactically in charge of that element. So you really got to know those fundamentals of your tactics. If you show up and you don't understand that, it's going to be really hard to gain the trust of your subordinates and your platoon sergeant, because he's going to see right through a lot of BS. So really, really focus on learning your tactical job.
And Sergeant Major, just for anyone who's watching this who may not really understand the nuance here, what's the difference in kind of role and expectations between a staff assignment and a platoon or company leadership role?
So staff, it's more strategic. You're more on the strategic level. You're big picture, 36,000 feet looking down. You're really focused on that, the big dynamics of the battalion or the brigade or the division, depending on where you are in the staff. And being in the platoon, you're on the ground. Like it is the actual functionality. It's not just a theory of how things are done. It's the actual ability of doing things. That's what, in my opinion, is the biggest difference between those positions.
Thank you. Let's go back to that relationship piece. So next question from the field is from Kevin out of Fort Carson. Have a great relationship with my platoon sergeant, but he's about to rotate out, and the new NCO coming in does not have the same level of experience. How do I give the new platoon sergeant an opportunity to grow into the role without hurting my platoon's mission?
All right, so you're saying platoon leader's been in a platoon leader position probably for a little while. Platoon sergeant's moving out, and now you're getting a young E6 coming up to become a platoon sergeant.
That is my understanding of the question, right?
Okay.
It's the old guy who trained up the platoon leader. The old NCO is now gone. You have the same platoon leader, but now there's a new person coming in who doesn't have the same level of experience. Like, what are you doing? Um,
So nothing really changes. You have to believe, and you have to think that that squad leader that's been selected as platoon sergeant who's coming in, they were selected for a reason. They weren't. It's not just it's your turn, time to go, right? They beat their peers on boards. They have a great resume. Um, Sit down and talk to them. Figure out what their experience levels are. I know when I first became a platoon sergeant, my first platoon leader, he was on his way out. I think I actually only worked with him for like 3 months before he left. But this guy was, airborne ranger, pathfinder. He did everything. This is one of the most high speed lieutenants I've ever met in my life. And to be honest with you, I was a young squad leader, staff sergeant coming in, and I was a little intimidated myself by this guy. Right? It was a little back and forth, but he gave me the opportunity to prove myself. Right? He said, "You're the platoon sergeant. This is where I see the platoon. This is my how I want this platoon to succeed. This is the path we're taking. These are my priorities. And this is what I want you to make your priorities." But then he said, "What do you think? What do you think of that idea?" He didn't make it in order. He came in, he had a clear vision, clear understanding of what he wanted the platoon to be, and he really looked at me to develop myself and to work with him to help keep moving forward and keep it improving. So I guess
I love the parallels between that answer and those 5 points that you need to be developing as a young leader. Right? There's very clear places of where those two overlap. Right, just managing expectations. If you're brand new to the team, the platoon sergeant, you can trust that they've been boarded. You can trust that they have experience. Like, what exactly should you expect from your platoon sergeant? Like, what are the basics?
the basics, you should expect him to understand the actual personnel in his platoon. Um, that platoon sergeant should know the dynamics of the personalities. So which squad leader is better at what team leader has the best experiences, and who, like little things like who's the best at PT and who needs an extra kick in the butt when time comes, and who needs a pat on the back to feel better about themselves. The platoon sergeant really should have an understanding of the people in his platoon. Um, I've always thought that the platoon leader owns the platoon, right? It's the platoon leader's platoon, but it's the platoon sergeant's soldiers.
No, that's perfect, right? The NCOs focus on the human element, and the officers are focused more on the mission piece.
Yes, exactly. The platoon leader needs to be mission focused. Now, I'm not saying they don't care about the soldiers. That's still going to be in their heads, right? But they need to be able to focus on accomplishing that mission, and the platoon sergeant can help deal with the personnel issues, dealing with, back in when I first started, it was the platoon sergeant was in charge of beans and bullets, right? That was the whole thing, beans and bullets. But that changed over the years. It's no longer that way, right? They're now part of the operations. They're part of decision making. We're now, we're part of the process, as well as being responsible for the overall well-being of the soldiers that we're in charge of.
Does that same relationship scale up to the company level?
It never stops. It
Perfect.
never stops.
But what is your advice for when that relationship goes bad? So one of the questions I have from someone who requested to remain anonymous. Hi, I'm currently a company commander, and I have lost all faith in one of my platoon sergeants. I think he's going to get someone killed if I don't stop him. How do I go about firing him?
Well, I mean, this is a company commander. It's his company. The best advice for I'll give a company commander is work with your first sergeant, right? Because that's what the first sergeant's there for. But there's the process. There's you do your NCO evaluations, you do your counseling and remedial training, and you build up almost like, I don't want to say a resume, but like a packet about this is what's going on. This is some of the issues that we're having, and this is why I want to move on from this NCO. I've seen this happen. I had to do this as a command sergeant major to one of my platoon sergeants who, when we were forward deployed, was not living up to what he was supposed to be living up to. And I had to work real close with that first sergeant and commander to try to get him to that point. Like, I don't think throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if you will, is necessary at first. But once you've exhausted all those counselings and trainings and try to do everything you can to make that NCO a better NCO, you gotta talk to your battalion commander, talk to your battalion commander, battalion CSM, and get them involved, because they're the ones that can make that decision pretty quickly if it needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, bottom line, it sounds like this company commander is very focused just on the problem and not so much all the people who have his or her back. What resources does the battalion have to help invest in the human element and maturing their leaders?
So at the the battalion CSM's up there. He's going to help out with developing the NCOs, right? That's one of the battalion command sergeant major's job, is to develop this NCO core, right? He should be focusing on that a lot whenever possible. If you have NCOs, like, I don't know what the job is, what this person does, but it might not be necessarily he's a bad NCO. He just might not be in the right position, right? There may be a position available in the staff that this NCO would thrive in, and vice versa, right? There might be someone in the staff that could really benefit and thrive as a platoon sergeant. Being a platoon sergeant it's not easy work. It's really hard, and it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy, and you spend a lot of time on other people. So it's hard to focus on yourself as a platoon sergeant and figure out, what do I need to fix as myself? What am I doing that I need to get better? So having that first sergeant or that CSM maybe sit down with them, have a conversation, say, what can we do to make you a better NCO, to push you past where you are now? I think that might help a little.
Yeah, and I mean, managing expectations for the new lieutenants. Is the platoon sergeant the first kind of NCO leadership role where you're focused on everyone around you more so than yourself?
I'd say it's the biggest one, right? So,
okay.
So as an infantry, I spent most of my time in the infantry, and my platoon sergeant time specifically was in an infantry platoon. The team leader has a few people, the squad leader has 8 that they're worried about, and as a platoon sergeant, I had 43 other people that I was worried that I had to deal with on a daily basis. So
I'll jump.
Yeah, that's your biggest. That's like, it's a huge jump going from 8 to 43, right? That's a big jump. So that's where it starts to get real on dealing with those sort of issues.
So bottom line, just give people grace, right? Just because they're in a role doesn't necessarily mean that they have a lot of experience doing that work, especially if they're that junior NCO coming in. And just like the lieutenants are trying to learn how to grow into being an officer, they need to expect that their teams are also trying to grow into their new roles as NCOs and senior NCOs.
Right. And just to hit on that one time, so that platoon sergeant I was having issues with in theater,
Yes.
And it's different. It's a different environment in theater than it is in the garrison world, right? Back at home station, because you have time to develop. You can work and do things and train, and you don't have time in theater, right? These guys were in Iraq, and I can't sit there and say, hey, well, let's train you up at this point. This is it's just not enough time. So I plucked that, basically. I mean, it's the best way to put it. I plucked that senior NCO out of Iraq, and I stuck him into the battalion headquarters, and I took a pretty good, what I thought was pretty good NCO E7 that was working on my staff, my 3 shop, and I moved him down to the platoon. I pushed him over to the platoon, and both of them after that move thrived, and they were doing great things. Like that NCO, when I brought him up to my staff, worked fantastic. He was great to have. And that NCO I sent down to replace him really turned that platoon around and made it a great deployment for the rest of that platoon.
So real quick, what is a 3 shop?
It's operations shop. It's one of the S, when you talked about the S shops that like 2 questions ago, the S1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the operations part of the battalion headquarters.
So thinking through, right, the differences that you just talked about between being downrange and back in garrison, is there a difference in leadership style that you have to take on based on the environment that you're in?
Of course, yeah. I believe 100% that there's difference. And the biggest thing is when you're in garrison, you can make mistakes, right? I used to tell my leaders, hey, this is where we make the mistakes. This is where we learn. It's okay to make a mistake in training. No one's really going to get killed. You make a wrong call. That's fine. But when you get out, when you're in theater and you're overseas, like, there's no room. There's no room for mistakes. Like, you have to be 100%, because all it takes is that one mistake, and then, it's catastrophic. It's a catastrophic failure. So yeah, you have to do that. You have to buckle down more. You have to be a little more stern, but you also have to know when to let little things go, right? Little things where you don't want to ramp the stress level up any higher than it needs to be in combat, but you can't be relaxed. You can't take it easy, especially when you're out running missions. You have to be very stern, and everything needs to be done correctly.
So do you have any advice for young officers who are trying to really find that balance between being a human, being approachable, and also being locked in on the mission?
Everybody's personalities are different, right?
Yeah.
All I can say to that is, don't fake being overly aggressive on the mission, right? Be yourself, like, be who you are as a person, right? But just know that you have to have that priority of mission first, right? When being a leader, if soldiers aren't coming to you with their issues, if they're not coming up and saying, hey, I got this problem, or this is going on in my life, you're losing trust, right? So you have to be able to maintain that approachability so that your subordinates trust you, not only at the job, but in life. Because, I mean, I'm sure all the other branches are the same way, but this is the only job that you'll ever have where people actually care about your well-being. When you go out in the civilian world, I'm retired now, right? So you get out in the civilian world, bosses don't care. Like, they don't care what your problems. You have a bad day, your wife lost her job. Your bosses don't care in the civilian world. The military is the only place, in my experience, that the leaders cared about that stuff. The people in charge of you cared, because they understood how it affects performance. So you have to figure out what your line is. How do you, as an individual, see to make sure that soldiers still trust you and come to you with their issues, but understand that when you say go, it's time to go, right? So they need to respect your authority, as well as being able to trust you and understand what you're saying.
You have soldiers bringing you problems, whether those are personal or professional, because those both impact the mission. How have you seen those type of problems and those conversations change when you're downrange versus when you're back in home station?
Well, honestly, I feel that downrange is a little easier. You compartmentalize a lot better when you're downrange. You have a clear-cut mission that you're focused on. When you leave the safety of your the wire or wherever you are, and you're moving out, like you don't have time to focus on all these other things, right? This is where you are. This is where your brain is, and you compartmentalize everything else. Those problems, they don't go away, right? They're not gone just because you're forward deployed in theater. They're still there, and they'll still bubble up. Um, the trick is when you're there is to have a great support system, both where you are and back home. So when you're a forward deployed unit, you're dealing with the same issues. People's mortgages still got to get paid, car payments still got to be made, right? All these other personal things, they don't stop, right? They still have to go on, and having the ability to take that time to understand what each individual's problems are. Like if you, as a platoon sergeant, I think I knew everybody's birthday, like what their birthday was, right? I took the time to learn these things about individual soldiers. And even as a first sergeant, I would have conversations and I would just try to remember like one or two things about each individual soldier in my company, like just one or two things. That way, when I have a conversation with them, I can say, hey, Sergeant Smith, how's your daughter doing? Did she do well on that spelling bee you were talking about last week, right? Just try to remember little things, and it goes a very long way to building that trust. It goes a very long way to feeling like that you understand them and you want they're important to you, not just what they do is important to you.
It's taking the time to get to know your troops.
100%. You've got to take the time to get to know them, and it's not. You don't have to hang out at the bar with them or go out to clubs with them. It's just sitting down with them, having a conversation. Hey, tell me about your life. Tell me about, hey, I see you're married. Tell me about your family. Small little things. That's what helps build that trust and that relationship, so that when you do forward deploy, right, they will trust you with not only the mission, but with personal stuff going on back home.
So when you're talking about the importance of building that support system before you go down range, is that relationship building piece really the single thing you'd point those young officers at of like, you need to do this?
So for a young officer, I don't think there's one single thing that they need to do, right? It's hard to say that. I have so much respect for young officers. I really do, because of the amount of responsibility that is thrown on your lap day one, right? Day one. As an NCO, I get to spend the first 5 years of my career not having to worry about anything but myself, right? You, as an officer, you don't get that luxury. You have to come in being the subject matter expert of your platoon, the moral compass. You have to be able to communicate effectively. You have to be able to lead effectively. It's so much more for a young officer. There's a lot of pressure there. But all those things are equally as important. Being the subject matter expert, being a master of your craft, getting to know your subordinates, they're all equally as important. There's no one that can knock the other one down, saying like, I need to be this more than that. That's how I feel about it. And I mean, I don't know any doctrine that says that, but it really is a very difficult task to accomplish.
Oh, and that's the importance of these kind of conversations, right? Because it's not going to be written down in doctrine. The human element isn't going to be on a page that you can just read and memorize. You have to build the relationships and have the conversation and do the hard work over time to get there. Sergeant Major, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to talk today and to share your thoughts. You previously provided your email. If anyone else reaches out with questions, may I forward those questions to you on their?
Yeah, of course.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like, comment, and share, or just check out one of our other interviews. You can also visit our website via the link below to submit your questions so you can participate in the next interview.